here would be brief. As you can see, it was clearly nothing like brief, and he left his impact on this campus, and we still talk about him today. He came and he worked in the Department of History, actually chairing that department, and the Division of Social Services. While here, he taught Greek and philosophy, leaving a lasting impact on his students. In 1978, when he retired from the classroom, he was named curator of the Elmhurst College Archives, continuing to impact the students. It is in great remembrance that the alumni of this college recognized that Dr. Schade's legacy should never be forgotten on this campus. They realized that his impact on students, his role as a role model for each individual on this campus, and his excellence as a teacher should be remembered for all. And for that reason, they established this lectureship. Each year, we have wonderful speakers come today, and today is nothing short of that. So I ask you, in the memory of Dr. Schade, to go back to the exciting night when President Barack Obama was elected.
Good evening, and we are already underway.
We can make some projections.
15 states in the District of Columbia, they're getting ready to close their polls. Take a look at this. We project that Senator Obama will carry the state of Massachusetts,
Connecticut, New Jersey,
Maryland,
Illinois,
the District of Columbia,
Delaware, Joe Biden's home state.
As New Hampshire goes, so goes Maine.
So far, so good.
Show us quickly why we haven't called Pennsylvania yet.
Because we don't have any votes. The big prize, really, if you're a strategist for McCain, Pennsylvania, too close to call.
They don't believe it's over yet.
This is a big one.
Barack Obama will win the battleground state of Pennsylvania.
This thing's still not over, and that's simply remarkable.
And with the polls closed in these states right now, we can make these projections. Barack Obama will carry these 5 states.
New York will go to Barack Obama. Michigan, Minnesota, the state of Wisconsin. Rhode Island makes it a complete sweep in New England for Barack Obama.
That's a bonanza of electoral votes going for Barack Obama.
At Obama 175, McCain 70.
We're going to continue our coverage, but first we have a projection.
We have a call to make. Megan, sorry to interrupt you there. We are now calling the state of Georgia for John McCain, so McCain folks can keep hope alive.
We have a major projection to make. Just happened as we were going to commercial. We can now project.
Ohio is gone for Obama.
Dana, do the folks in that room at the Biltmore Hotel in Phoenix where you are, do they know about these projections that we're making?
Since this news has broken about Ohio, Pennsylvania before that, it has not been announced here at all.
We have polls closing now in 4 more states across the country, a total of 20 electoral votes.
You would agree with me on that?
I'm sorry, we're going to have a projection now, Will.
And this is a big one. Senator Barack Obama will carry the state of Virginia.
207 electoral votes now. McCain at 129. It's now 11 o'clock on the East Coast, and Keith, we can report history.
Barack Obama is projected to be the next president of the United States of America. NBC News calling for the Democratic candidate.
ABC News is now ready to project that Barack Obama will carry the state of California, carry other states in the West. Barack Obama will be the 44th president of the United States.
Senator Barack Obama of Illinois will be the next president of the United States.
And CNN can now project that Barack Obama, 47 years old, will become the president-elect of the United States,
11 p.m. on the East Coast. We're back on the air, and we have news. There will be young children in the White House for the first time since the Kennedy generation. An African-American has broken the barrier as old as the Republic. An astonishing candidate, an astonishing campaign, a seismic shift in American politics. You are looking at the 44th president of the United States. The celebrations begin.
What began 21 months ago in the depths of winter cannot end on this autumn night. This victory alone is not the change we seek. It is only the chance for us to make that change. And that cannot happen if we go back to the way things were. It can't happen without you, without a new spirit of service, a new spirit of sacrifice. So let us summon a new spirit of patriotism, of responsibility, where each of us resolves to pitch in and work harder and look after not only ourselves but each other. America, we have come so far. We have seen so much, but there's so much more to do. So tonight, let us ask ourselves, if our children should live to see the next century, what change will they see? What progress will we have made? This is our chance to answer that call. This is our moment. This is our time to put our people back to work and open doors of opportunity for our kids, to restore prosperity and promote the cause of peace, to reclaim the American dream and reaffirm that fundamental truth that out of many we are one, that while we breathe, we hope, and where we are met with cynicism and doubt and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
It is a tough job to pick American society apart and piece it back together, all while doing so in ways that are unexpected, unanticipated, yet much appreciated. His column in the Washington Post demonstrates that Eugene Robinson is a master at this job of demolition and reassembly. He possesses a remarkable narrative style, elegant writing, insatiable curiosity, and the ability to draw on life's experiences that took him from what was then called the colored side of the tracks to the heights of American journalism. His remarkable storytelling ability has won him wide acclaim, most notably as the winner of the 2009 Pulitzer-prize for his commentary on the 2008 presidential race that resulted in the election of America's first African-American president. He saw long before the recent election divided the states into red and blue that politics and culture are always intertwined. In a career spanning 25 years at the Washington Post, Eugene Robinson has been a City Hall reporter, city editor, foreign correspondent in Buenos Aires and London, foreign editor, and assistant managing editor in charge of the paper's award-winning style section. Mr. Robinson has written books about race in Brazil and music in Cuba, covered a heavyweight championship fight, witnessed riots in Philadelphia and a murder trial in the deepest Amazon. He sat with presidents and dictators, the Queen of England, acquired fluent Spanish, passable Portuguese, and handicapped 3 editions of American Idol. He's even reached a truce, albeit uneasy, with the noxious hip-hop lyrics festering in his teenage son's iPod. Eugene Robinson was raised in Orangeburg, South Carolina. His early memories include the culminating years of the Civil Rights Movement. He was educated at the University of Michigan, where he was the first Black student to be named co-editor-in-chief of the student newspaper, the Michigan Daily. Mr. Robinson was named a Nieman Fellow in journalism at Harvard University. He's been elected to the Council of Foreign Relations, is a member of the National Association of Black Journalists, is a regular contributor to MSNBC. He resides in Arlington, Virginia, with his wife and 2 sons. Join me in listening as Eugene Robinson shares his reflections on the promise of Obama 1 year later. Let's give a rousing Elmhurst College welcome to Mr. Eugene Robinson.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Barack Obama. What an act to follow. Thank you, Elmhurst College, for giving me a night off from my entertaining but highly dysfunctional MSNBC family. I appreciate it. All except Rachel. Rachel was fine, but... But sometimes we can do with a night off from Chris and Keith, and if anyone out there can't tolerate a night away from Chris and Keith, we're starting a 12-step program for that. So, watching that video of election night, I confess that I almost got a little tear in my eye. It was an amazing, historic evening, and it brought to mind 2 really vivid recollections that I have, and so I'd like to tell you about both of them. The first one, I have to tell a bit of a story to tell. I was born and raised in Orangeburg, South Carolina, at the tail end of Jim Crow segregation in the South. So I went to all black schools until high school, and yes, there were segregated drinking fountains and segregated playgrounds and segregated everything. In February 1968, students at the 2 historically black colleges in Orangeburg began a demonstration which was over a segregated bowling alley in Orangeburg called the All-Star Lanes. Well, the demonstration grew and grew and ended up lasting for 3 nights and became quite a large demonstration, became about more than a bowling alley. I remember after the second night of the demonstration, my house is about 200 or 300 yards from where the nightly demonstrations were going on. And after the second night, I got up to look out the window to see what was going on because all the schools were closed and the town was in an uproar. And I looked out the window and my father yelled at me in a voice that I had never heard before and that I never heard since. He was a very, very, very gentle man. And he yelled, "Get down out of the window right now." And so I got down, paid attention, and he let me peek over the sill. And there was a line of 12 highway patrol cars on a little strip of grass across from our house. All of the officers were out of their cars, the doors were open, and they were crouched behind the door, the open doors, with their rifles out and trained at a house 2 doors down from ours. That was where they had deduced the student leader of the demonstrations was staying, and they were going to try to arrest him for stirring up all the colored folk in Orangeburg. Well, he had better intelligence than they did, so it turned out he was long gone. So there was no gunplay that morning, but there was that evening. The state troopers claimed they were fired on from campus. This was never demonstrated. No weapon was ever found. There was never any forensic evidence to support that claim, although this was in the days before CSI. But one thing we know is that the state troopers did fire toward the campus, and when the smoke cleared, 3 students had been killed. all shot in the backs or in the soles of their feet. A number of other students were injured. The only person to ever spend a day in jail from the result of after this demonstration was the student organizer, who was eventually convicted on some trumped-up charge. I am happy to say that South Carolina has changed quite a bit since those days, although then again, Joe Wilson. So I tell that long story to get us to that moment. You heard on that video, you heard the voice of Keith Olbermann, actually, saying that at 11 p.m. on election night, saying that Barack Obama was the next president of the United States. Well, I was sitting about 2 chairs away from him on the commentary desk at Rockefeller Center, working for MSNBC that evening. And we had been told 15 minutes earlier at 10:45 through our little earpieces that Barack Obama was the winner and the network was going to call it at 11 o'clock when the polls closed in California. So I had 2 immediate thoughts when we heard this through our ear. Number 1, try to think of something to say because you're the black guy and they're going to come to you. Okay. And that was right, they did. That was the first thought. They're going to come right to you, they're just going to announce it and look at you and you got to say something. But my second thought was to wait for the next break, which was right then. I pulled out my cell phone and I called my mom and dad. And so I got to tell my father that he had lived to see the election of the first African-American president of the United States. And that is a moment I will never forget. I certainly will never forget it now. My father unfortunately passed away on January 2nd. He was quite ill at the time. But it was just an amazing moment, a moment that I never thought I would see in my life, to be able to make that phone call. The other thing I remember so vividly from that night is those scenes from Grant Park, and the cameras kept going back to the faces. There was the Reverend Jackson with tears coming down his face. Just people you didn't know, people you did know. I had the chance sitting on the anchor desk to interview John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, remotely. One of the great heroes of the civil rights movement, still bears the scars he received in a brutal beating on the Edmund Pettus Bridge during the Selma to Montgomery marches. And I got to talk to him that evening about how he felt to have lived to see that day. And so the following morning, it wasn't my day to write a column, but darn it, I was going to write a column. So I called my editor to make my argument about why I should write out of turn, and the editor just picked up the phone and said, yeah, right, yes, we knew, you're going to write the column. But I still had some TV to do, and I was still up in New York. So MSNBC gave me an office at Rockefeller Center that I could use to write, provided that I came out occasionally to do my appearances on MSNBC. So here was the cycle, which repeated 5 or 6 times. I would go into my little office, and I'd start writing this column, and it became a column about that night, about what it felt like, about history and emotion and that feeling that I had had when I talked to John Lewis, and when I thought of the history of race in America since 1619, when the first slaves were brought ashore at Jamestown, and I think of my mother and father, and so I'd be sitting there writing. I managed to write about 2 paragraphs, and my tears were just flowing down my face. And so a producer would come in and say, "Time for your next hit." "Oh, Dern, look at you. Take him back to makeup." And so they take me over to makeup, And they fix me up, and I go on and do my TV thing, and then I go back and continue working on the column, and I'd start it over again, and the tears would come down, and I'll take him back to makeup. So I went to makeup about 6 times that day. Didn't do a lot of good it did, but it was the column that resulted. Actually, I usually don't write the headlines, but I did write the headline for this one, and it was headline Morning in America. It was the last of the 10 columns that the Washington Post submitted to the Pulitzer-prize board for their consideration, and that were given the 2009 prize for commentary. And the Pulitzers were announced in April. To be more specific, it was Monday, April 20th. It was actually at 3 p.m., if I'm sure you all recall that. And it was just an amazing thing to happen to me at this point in my career for that story in particular. One of the first emails I got was from our great editorial cartoonist, Tom Towles, who said, "Now prepare to hear from everyone you've ever met." Well, congratulations. Well, I did hear from everyone I'd ever met for the next 24 hours, and it was wonderful, and I was pretty exhausted by the afternoon of the next day. But then my cell phone started buzzing, and I almost didn't answer it, but you know, you don't win the Pulitzer Prize very often. So I answered the phone, and an operator's voice says, "Mr. Robinson, please hold for the president." And so I was looking at the caller ID, and it was funny, so I didn't think it was a joke. It wasn't a number, it was just 202, just the area code, and that's how it comes up when it's the White House. And so sure enough, a voice sounding just like Fred Armisen on Saturday Night Live comes on the phone. And he says, "Gene, I just wanted to congratulate you on your Pulitzer." And he goes, and it's richly deserved, and I think your columns are thoughtful and fair, except that column this morning, which I thought was complete nonsense. And yes, indeed, the president then proceeded to chew me out for 10 minutes about a column that I had written that morning, which had been, I thought, mildly critical, but I guess he took it to be a bit more critical of his performance at the Summit of the Americas, which had just happened. And I thought he had been a bit played by Hugo Chavez, and he disagreed. And I learned from that phone call that now we have a president who reads newspapers. And who reads them to the end, because he was arguing about things I had said in the last paragraph. He said in that video clip, in that speech on election night, and he said throughout the campaign, "Yes, we can." Well, we're almost exactly a year later. Are we? Are we doing it? I guess first you have to ask, yes, we can what? Because he was never quite specific about that, but in a sense he was. If you'll recall, during the early primaries, President Obama had a stump speech that was one of the great stump speeches, I think, in the history of American politics, in which he managed to make audiences see the possibilities of a better world. And he always ended that speech when he really had the crowd going with an exhortation, "Let's go change the world." Pretty ambitious, but he was serious about it. That's the standard that he set for himself, and I think the standard that he wants to be held to. And I actually would argue that at this point, we can say that President Obama, certainly for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, is holding up his end of the bargain. Now, it is easy to think of and to enumerate and run down the various things that the president has not yet completed, some that he has not yet begun. The prison at Guantanamo Bay, it's still open and functioning. I frankly think it's overwhelmingly likely that it will be open and functioning for some period of time beyond the deadline that the president himself set, which was January 21st of next year. He said it would be within 1 year, and it's starting to look like it's not going to be within 1 year. He said he would get rid of don't ask, don't tell, and the assorted related policies, especially in the military. He has not, and in fact, there are many in the gay community who have pushed him hard, who have wanted to see a lot more progress on gay rights, and believe he has been too cautious and too slow. On health care, the president started with the premise that he would not push for complete total reform, in the sense that he would not push for a single-payer system, not even have a discussion about a single-payer system. I'm not sure we would have ended up with one. I'm not even sure one would have been desirable, but it was taken off the table at the beginning, as was the notion of truly universal health coverage. What we will end up with will be near universal, but it will not be completely universal. He has certainly kept his commitment to withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq. As a matter of fact, he is ahead of schedule in terms of the drawdown of forces from Iraq, but he has already doubled the U.S. troop strength in Afghanistan, and he is now in the middle of a study process that is contemplating what you could only call a major escalation of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, with what I believe to be quite uncertain prospects. So it's easy to run down a bunch of things that he hasn't done. Remember, it's only been certainly not a year that he's been in office. It's only been 10 months that he's been in office. And it seems like a much longer time in terms of how much has happened in those brief months. And it becomes harder to remember all the things that President Obama has done. I would start with, number one, with the small matter of saving the country from a new Great Depression, which I think you could argue that the president and his crisis managers at Treasury, with help from Ben Bernanke at the Fed, have managed to keep what was always destined to be a severe recession from becoming something much worse. Today, the president got to exult in recent economic, the figures announced today, which showed that during the third quarter, the economy grew at a respectable rate of something like 3.2%. We don't feel it yet. I don't feel it yet. Then again, in my business, the newspaper business, I don't know when we're going to feel like we're coming out of the recession. I hope we do someday. And employment certainly will be a lagging indicator. But at some point, if you believe the economists, and I do tend to believe them, the recession is over and the economy has started to grow again. The stimulus bill, which was at the time the biggest spending bill that had ever been passed by our Congress, was much maligned at the time. and it is still maligned by the president's critics, but I would argue that it has done a good deal of what it set out to do. The proof is, for me, is in the pudding. And the results, the economic results that we're seeing now, tend to indicate that whatever the president's been doing, it's been the right stuff. Away from economics, he may not have quite closed Guantanamo yet, but he ended the practice of torture as practiced by agents of the United States. To me, that is of enormous significance, and I am a forgiving person by nature, but that's the one thing I personally could never forgive George Bush. I could never forgive turning our agencies, our intelligence agencies and our military into instruments of torture was unspeakable, and I could never forgive him for doing that in my name as a citizen of the United States, and for President Obama to have forthrightly ended the practice and the possibility of torture, I think is a great achievement. He has near completely changed America's image in the rest of the world. In an interview with President Obama, long before he was president, before even he was candidate Obama, but when he was thinking about it, we got onto the subject of foreign policy, and he made the argument that he would, if he ever became president, present a different face of America to the world, and that this would make a difference in foreign policy. I'm an old foreign editor, I'm a little skeptical, I'm a journalist, that's my job to be skeptical, so I pushed back and said, yeah, but is that really going to happen? Is it really? It's about more than cosmetics, it's about more than touchy-feely. But I've since had to write a column in which I said that I believe I underestimated the importance of being Obama. I believe I underestimated the impact in a foreign policy sense of having a president who looks and sounds so different from the world's idea of an American president. It's not just by looking and sounding different, however, that he has changed our image. It is by embracing the idea of multilateralism, by shifting U.S. foreign policy away from cowboy unilateralism, at least in the minds of people around the world. He has vastly altered the way people view this country. He has even had great impact in the Muslim world by going to Egypt and speaking directly to Muslims, and by being named Barack Hussein Obama. That does make a difference in the Muslim world. He has brought us, not quite there, but to the brink of meaningful health care reform for the first time. And put it in perspective, we have been talking about health care reform since the Truman administration. Democrats have been trying to do it since the Truman administration. Never have we gotten this close. Some of the reforms, the legislation that emerges will be, in my view, imperfect, and perhaps even incomplete. It will need work. But I believe it will do some incredibly important things. I believe, number one, it will, in the end, prohibit insurance companies from denying insurance or canceling policies because of pre-existing conditions, which will be make an enormous difference. Two, I believe it will make health insurance portable in a way that it always should have been, but isn't now, and is responsible for all sorts of distortions in the economy. I have a sister-in-law who has a pre-existing condition. It's a form of leukemia, and she is, if she could, she would quit the school system job that she has. But if she did quit, she could never get the health insurance that she now has, so she continues to work. And so if she were sick enough to be able to go out on disability, then maybe she'd be able to keep her insurance. But that's not the kind of thing you should have to think about when you're battling leukemia. And it's a story that's repeated in families across the nation. I believe that's going to get fixed. I also believe that while this will not be truly universal health care in the sense of 100%, they're now talking 94%, pretty close, much closer than we are now, to full coverage. And they're talking about a mandate that would essentially say everybody needs to get health insurance, and by the way, here's some assistance for those of you who can't afford to do it. And it establishes the principle that health insurance is something that everyone ought to have, that every American ought to have one way or another. I think that's a really important principle to establish that hasn't been established before. And so while I think that the legislation that eventually comes out will not be perfect, I think it may well be perfectible over time, and that will certainly leave things much, much better than they were before. Now, I would argue that this is a pretty good record for 10 months. There are, however, things that the White House did not anticipate. And people at the White House are can be frank about this when pressed. One thing they did not anticipate when they came into office was that the Republican Party's stance, whether it's political or ideological or for whatever reason, would be essentially to say no. And then to say no again, and then to say no again, not to collaborate with the agenda of the administration, which is certainly the right of the Republican Party to do. But the White House did not see that coming, and they didn't know that they were going to have to, essentially on every piece of legislation, hold on to every single Democratic senator in order to get anything through. So they were all set to play a game in which you try to pick off a liberal Republican here or there. They were not all set to play a game in which you're always trying to hold on to the blue dog Democrats. And there's been a learning curve for them on that game. They think they're getting better at it now. They weren't that good at it at first. One thing that is really, really striking, though, and the video reminded me, is, when you look at President Obama, you see a little bit more gray hair, perhaps, a little bit. But in general, he looks marvelous, doesn't he? I mean, and he does. It is amazing how well the job seems to fit him. I had the opportunity to interview him in the Oval Office not long ago, and that's a fairly intimidating thing to do because it's the Oval Office. So you go through this kind of maze of passageways, and then he kind of stepped out to greet me and walk me in, and I was struck as I looked around. Several of his aides were standing there, and they looked about like you'd expect. They looked like people who were working 18-hour days and had been doing so for the last 7 or 8 months. They had bags under their eyes, they had sallow complexions, they were schlumped like this, they were twitching because their blackberries kept going off. And several of them had developed tics. You know, they looked like they should look. The president looked like he had stepped off the cover of Men's Vogue. He just looked great. He had a sheen. He had a glow. He was gracious, and he's just distressingly smart. It's always a bit unnerving when interview subjects. First of all, it unnerves journalists when interview subjects actually answer your questions. I mean, especially politicians, that's just not done. And then when they get what you're driving at before you get the question out, and then they jump ahead of you, and they understand more about the implications of the question you're asking than you understood when you asked it, then that's just wrong. That's just wrong. It shouldn't be that way. But that's kind of the way he is. As I sat there interviewing him and talking to him, trying to interview him, I noticed there were 2 moments that I noticed that were really striking. One, I noticed that across the room from where his desk is, so that the window's behind him and he looks across the room, and what would he see? Well, on the kind of credenza, I think it's a credenza, on the other side of the Oval Office, there's a bust of Dr. Martin Luther King. And so one of the things in the president's field of vision as he's sitting at his desk and as he's looking out and he's making his decisions is a bust of Dr. King. And when I noticed that stopped me for a minute, and I kind of couldn't speak for a second, because that's not something I thought I would see. The next moment was when I looked around, and I was there with a couple of the president's aides and the president, and I said, "There's nothing in here but black folks." And I noticed because the president was there, I was there, an aide from his press office who is African American was there, Valerie Jarrett was there, Michael Strautmanis, one of his lawyers, was there. And it was a moment when there had been a photographer there, but the photographer had stepped out. And so for that moment, there was nothing but black folks in the Oval Office. And I said, wow, do you think this has anything to do with the Tea Parties? I don't know. But maybe it does, maybe it does. So, anyhow, the point of that long digression is I do think he's doing his part. I guess my question is, are we, meaning the American people, supporters, non-supporters, all of us, are we doing our part? One of the really unique, I think, aspects of the Obama campaign was the extent to which he was able to arouse enthusiasm, support, and able to show people a vision of possibility, of a better world, of a more peaceful world, of a more prosperous world, of a better way to live. He was able to paint this picture for us, but he can't paint it by himself. The point wasn't, let me go change the world. It's, let's go change the world. And so, on healthcare, for example, where are the voices of all the young people who so enthusiastically and so pivotally helped the Obama campaign and really made the Obama presidency possible? They have been notably absent from the debate over healthcare reform. Now, we all know that's why that's the case. Young people are never going to get ill. They don't care about health insurance because they're going to live forever. And I felt that way when I was young too. But that's something that has been missing from the equation that I think is necessary if the president really is going to make progress on the progressive agenda that he has laid out for himself. I guess I'm not saying that people should be patient with him. I'm saying quite the contrary, that we need passion on all sides of the issue. We need commitment on all sides of the issues. And so those who believe that Guantanamo should have been closed a year ago, and certainly should have been closed the day he took office, and why is it taking a year? We need your voices too. Your voices should be heard as well. Those who believe that he's moving too slowly on don't ask, don't tell, and on gay rights in general, we need your voices. Your voices should be heard. He needs to hear your voices. What I'm saying is that people should be involved and should be passionate, just like they were during the campaign, and there's been an odd switch. The most implacable opponents of the president have found their voice and their passion. Some of it's a little crazy. I mean, it's all about, was he born in Hawaii, or was he born on Mars, or was he, these kind of insane conspiracy theories. But it's not all about that. It's not all about insane conspiracy theories. There is real passion on the right, and after you sift out the Glenn Becks and the wingnuts, you find people who care passionately about the direction that the country is headed. I wish we were hearing the same kind of passion all down the spectrum, and I think at the moment we're not. And so I think the question is properly phrased. Yes, we can, but no, he can't all by himself. And what are we doing to make possible the kinds of change that the president said he was going to bring about? 1 year is not an awfully long time in the life of a presidency, to say nothing in the life of a nation. So it is too early to say whether Barack Obama will go down in history as a great president or even a good president. But I think if we're going to take a measure after 1 year, we can say this is a president who is here to try to do something. And we'd all better pay attention. And if we have strong feelings about what he's doing, pro or con, it'd be a good idea to let him know. Thank you so much, Elmhurst College. You've been gracious and delightful. I would love to take your questions.
My name's Eric Lutz. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Leader, the campus newspaper here. First of all, I just want to really thank Mr. Robinson for coming out tonight. His insights into American politics are at the forefront of journalism, and his work serves as a great model for people like me who have an interest in the profession. So I'd like to thank Mr. Robinson for speaking tonight. Give him a round of applause. And I'd like to present him with this gift from the college. So.